Thank you for joining XR Om, which is India's first AR VR focused podcast. And today I'm delighted and honored to have with me Mr. Tom Taulli, who's an author, speaker, investor, and a startup advisor with a focus primarily on technology. He's a serial entrepreneur and a contributor to Forbes.com who has been in the tech industry for over 25 plus years. So, Tom, really appreciate you taking time being part of our humble podcast. Why don't we start with a small, brief introduction, your background, because you've been in the space for over 25 years. So,
Yeah.
maybe while you're giving your intro and background, maybe also give your perspective on how technology has evolved over the years. How has it changed?
hmm Sure, and thanks very much for having me on. I really appreciate it. Actually, my career in technology is probably more than 25 years. I got started when I was in high school, so I started selling my programs when I was in high school, and that was on an Atari 400 with 16K of RAM, and there was no diskette. There was cassette that you would use to load in your program. So to say technology has come a long way, I mean, if there's one, there's Moore's law, right? I mean, Moore's law more than anything probably encapsulates technology. It just gets faster and cheaper and better, and it just doesn't stop. So, if you're in this industry, it's a great place to be. And yeah, I guess I could have done other things with my life, and I didn't. So some people get bored with it, what they do, but you'll never get bored with technology. And now we're getting into a stage where you mentioned, you're focused on VR and the metaverse and things of that sort. So it does seem like that's the next stage where things are going, where things are more immersive and definitely more sophisticated. You put things on your head, and you go into these other worlds. So things have come a long way since my Atari 400 was 16K in a cassette. And I can't imagine what it'll be 10 years from now or 20 years from now. And I expect to be around to see what happens. So yeah, so I mean, in terms of how I look at technology, that's it. I mean, it just gets better, faster. It just gets it just moves and innovates. So it's the nature of the business. And also just a little background or two. Um, um, my background is you get a little diverse in terms of the technologies I cover, but I have a new book coming out in late November called How to Create a Web3 Startup. So I cover a lot of the blockchain and tokens and DAOs, and you name it, it covers it. And then the last chapter is on the metaverse. So I have coverage of that in there as well. So I'm pretty excited with that to see how it does. So that's kind of my next thing, and yeah, love to talk about the topic.
I'm going to talk about, I mean, not just the new book that you're writing, how to create a Web3 startup, because I think that's the most exciting space. But I think we'll go linear wise and we'll go, pull you back a little bit, because besides this book, you've done other books also. And you spoke about, how technologies evolved over the last few decades, from your cassettes to, you mentioned Moore's Law, I mean, in the early days, computer was almost like a size of a room. And right now we are
hmm
in the process of miniaturizing technology, and I think that's so profound, because it
hmm
over the years, I mean, I think mobile was, and communication was one of the coolest invention. Mobile at one point in time, it used to be like a really huge,
hmm
bulky, and the only thing that it could do was, it could make calls. I mean, I don't
hmm
think anybody imagined, 30 years back, when we first had mobiles, that it could completely take over our lives. It could
hmm
upend society, because it's
Right.
it's a mini computer in your pocket, and we are nowhere close to going how deep we can go down, how smaller we can, make technology. So it's an exciting space. If you could
hmm
just maybe talk about the exciting parts of the technology and how it's going to affect us, or both consumers
hmm
as well as businesses.
hmm Well, I mean, there's the technology that we see, you know, the the applications, the headsets, and so forth. But for that to happen, there's a lot that needs to go on behind the scenes. You need bandwidth, you need 5G, you need, all the sophisticated hardware, you need data centers, you need all this compute power. So I think one thing that gets lost in this metaverse conversation is that there's going to be a huge demand for that back end, kind of the boring stuff, but you got to have the boring stuff because you can't have the cool stuff without the boring stuff. So there's a lot more to this than meets the eye. And if you look at Facebook, for example, with they're spending 20 billion a year, a lot of that is back end. A lot of that is the data center. It's powering these things so that experience becomes lifelike. There's very low latency when it comes to that. Getting that information to your headset. The AI is it's really back end technology. And then with all this data that we're collecting, how do we use that AI to create those experiences? So a lot of this, like our NVIDIA, for example, those GPUs that, allow for these really immersive experiences. So there's going to be a lot done on the semiconductor side. And even extrapolate even further, there's quantum computing that is a whole new other way of looking at how to operate a computer at a different level where, if it really works, it's still in the early stages. It could be, in a sense, quantum leaps in terms of the capacity of what these computers can do. So, now what's interesting is that you're seeing a lot of this come into play at the same time. And in order to create these technologies, you mentioned mobile, there had to be certain things that, there's certain preconditions that need to be there for that to happen. And Steve Jobs was a smart person because he realized the market was ripe for that. And I think where the issue will be for the metaverse is, and Zuckerberg has mentioned, this is not a 1 year thing, it's a 10-year, maybe 20-year thing, is that the timing of it. So there's certain preconditions that need to be there. And for some of these entrepreneurs, you're going to have some entrepreneurs that are probably just too early, you know, and those that'll hit it big will just somehow, maybe more by accident than anything, get the timing right. But there's a lot that needs to happen. So that's a lot of opportunity for people, and it's global and it's huge and there's a lot of money there. But I think you have to think very strategically, and this is where understanding some of the history of technology comes into play. That if you just see the technology and it's just not there, maybe go on to something else in technology, because if you don't get the timing right, it can be really difficult. So I think there's a lot of different steps along this journey. It's not going to happen overnight, but that's the exciting thing. So the journey is the fun part.
Right, yeah, exactly. Yeah, the journey always is the fun part, and sometimes, like you mentioned in the beginning of the conversation, I think the boring stuff leads to like the interesting stuff. You do the
Yeah.
boring stuff first, and that will open up like really big opportunities. You
Absolutely.
have written artificial intelligence basics on
Mhm.
non-technical introduction.
Mhm.
Could you talk about, maybe like summarize about the book?
Through writing for Forbes, kind of the inspiration was that AI was becoming obviously more topical, but it was a complicated area. A lot of mathematics, complex logic. You really did have to being that most people are not going to be data scientists, so but they do want you have managers that are not going to be data scientists, but they have to have some understanding of basic understanding of how the technology works. So that's how the framework I was operating under. So there's no equations or Python or data pipelines or any. You don't have to do any of that. It's all high level, and I cover all the main bases. So what is machine learning? What is deep learning? Um, what natural language processing? How to do an AI project, what's involved, what not to do, not how to, robotics, not the software robotics, but the actual robots that or in a warehouse, and how do robots work? And what I found is a lot of these concepts that we think are new are really not new. There's a lot of smart people who have been thinking about these for decades. It just happens that it took a long time, for the compute power to come about, to have the availability of data. And at the end of the day, I mean, if there's one conclusion, it's data. Um, if you don't have data, you really don't have artificial intelligence. Um, and you need good data, quality data, and that's the big challenge with AI. But whenever there's a challenge, that's a good thing for entrepreneurs. So there's a lot to be done with data on the AI side. But that's kind of the focus of the book, is for those are probably not going to be data scientists, but you want to know what's happening with this technology.
I think, today we're living in a time, whether it's consumers or whether it's enterprise, you need to be a lifelong learner. You need to continuously learn, because things are moving at the speed of light, and the businesses. I think there's so much data. If you kind of infer those valuable insights or signals from the data, you can build great businesses. So AI is a great tool for enterprise, and there are so many your consumer use cases also. I mean, there's some cool things happening with Taulli 2 for the creators. The GPT-3 do some awesome thing with your text to code, and some like really cool innovations happening over there. What caught my attention was your post on LinkedIn, where you had created a post on Metaverse and how the largest impact is going to be for enterprise. Could you kind of explain first what is the Metaverse? And B, when you meant that the largest impact is going to be in the space of enterprise, could you kind of share some examples over there?
The metaverse is really a highly immersive virtual world. It could be a game, it could be education, it could be a lot of different use cases. We're still in the early stages of that. With the enterprise, it's different because training. Just as an example, training in the real world is it's not the best experience, even when you're in a classroom or in-person experience. There's someone at the chalkboard or whiteboard, and they're putting stuff, and maybe there's a slideshow, and it only goes so far. Now the teacher can answer some questions and things like that. But where the metaverse really takes it to another level is if I'm a surgeon, and it's training is critical because you don't want someone to die on the operating table. You can do that all in the metaverse, and that's being done today. So if I'm a med student, I definitely, that med school will probably pay, or your tuition will pay for the headset. And, you'd probably be a much better surgeon because of that. So I think that, in the corporate enterprise side, I do think there's probably more near-term opportunity with the metaverse, because the costs are not that big of a deal, because corporations will pay for it. They don't care. Corporations have a huge need, especially for training. And the training is probably so much more effective than it would be with traditional training. So I do think there's multiple factors there that would drive that as a big market opportunity for entrepreneurs.
Right. I think the training is going to be a huge space for metaverse, because the metaverse, I think, is going to completely upend the way we do business, because earlier we used to, like maybe go to school for education. We used to go to a hospital for healthcare, but I think with once the metaverse kind of comes in, everything, all of these kind of binds, because I believe that metaverse is not one single technology. I think it's a convergence of augmented reality, virtual reality, mixed reality, and underpinning it would be, obviously you mentioned, 5G, because the bandwidth, it's a very data hungry thing. And what the metaverse does is that kind of flips it instead of you going to the school, you bring the school to you, because you are immersed in the school. Instead of going to the healthcare, the healthcare comes to you. So those are the points which are really, really cool. And you mentioned about training. I think training is an industry is going to completely upend over the period of years. It's already been doing that and showing real world benefits, how training is being leveraged through AR, VR, MR. And once all this gets binded together, when we have that metaverse, the training is a space which will get completely upended. You mentioned that you're writing this new book, how to create a Web3 startup. Would you like to give a glimpse of the new book?
It's there are not even many Web3 books out there even now, because it's so early in this category. But I suppose I was presuming that I was thinking at first writing maybe a Web3 basics, but I thought there's probably going to be a ton of those books anyway. So maybe a little twist on it would be from the standpoint of an entrepreneur who's looking at this market, and it's very different because you got to deal with the blockchain. There may be different governance structures, such as the DAOs, and there's legal issues. There's how to manage these things. There's different layers. These different layer 1, layer 2, layer 3 technology. There's like these core, kind of like we were talking about with the metaverse. You got to build out this core infrastructure to allow it to happen. That's where the focus is primarily now. Then you start getting into the applications. As should be not a surprise, a lot of the early movers in this space have been in the gaming industry. Shouldn't be a surprise because they've been working on payment mechanism. Buying virtual goods in a game have been around for a long time. So there's a lot of similarities between gaming and what you see Web3 and the metaverse and so forth. So the book really just is a bit of a primer on the different things you got to know about this. And then also I talked to a variety of companies and founders who created their own Web3 companies and then talk about their own experiences and the things that worked and didn't work. Then there's a whole regulation aspect to it. I cover primarily the United States, but a lot of times these are global organizations. So, if I run a Web3 company, what does that mean if I'm in Europe or India or South America? So there's a lot of things, but so a lot, those at Andreessen and Sequoia think Web3 is the next platform. You never know, it might or may not be. So, but I do think it's something that kind of like the AI basics. It's not a technical book. It's not like you have to, build a smart contract on Ethereum. And I'm not going to talk about how to do that. There's lots of books that tell you how to do that, or videos that tell you how to do that. But it just talks more about building of companies and how to think. How the companies of the future may not look like the companies we've seen in the past.
Right. You rightfully pointed out that the companies of the future is not going to look like the companies of the past, because I guess the entire Web3 model, we going to move from the current business model of extract maximum value from a business to move to a world which is decentralized, interoperable, open, and some of the Web3, which at least the ethos says it's built by the people, by the creators, which is everyone of us who is a content creator of sort, or developer.
Sure.
But that is something, though, it sounds nice. It's something which I completely fail to understand, because we live in a world which is completely centralized, hierarchical, and any and every businesses functions in a centralized top-down manner.
Right.
How do you see enterprises gearing up for something like that?
Mhm.
Do we move to a world which is decentralized? Is that even possible?
Mhm. Mhm.
What are your views on that full
Yeah.
decentralized?
The argument of centralized versus decentralized is more of a nuanced argument. You'll never have a purely centralized or purely decentralized. I don't, we live in the world. We live in a world of practical, things that need to get done. So there's a lot of issues with decentralization. No doubt about it. But I think it's more about degree. It's moving a little more away from the centralizations that we have seen, and to a little bit more of a decentralized area. But I don't think it's going to be where, you know, an average person is going to create their own smart contract on the Ethereum blockchain. That doesn't seem very realistic. The other thing too is, while you do have participation in these platforms, it probably is similar to how things run in the real world with voting for politicians. The United States. I mean, we're kind of the part of the emergence of modern democracy. Yet a lot of people don't vote in this country. So there's going to probably be a lot of people that participate in these Web3 platforms that don't vote, or they'll say, why do I want to vote on this? I don't even know what I should be voting on. They'll have some technical thing about what they'll do with their platform. It's like, I could really care less. I just come here for this and this, and that's it. And I don't want to waste my time with other things. Um, so yeah, there's a lot of idealism, and that happened at every stage of the internet. When I was there in the early days of the internet, there's a lot of idealism, but practical realities, mug you at the end of the day. So I I don't see it as, like, oh, we're going to go to a completely decentralized environment. But I think it maybe more so than what we've seen maybe in the past 15 years. Um, and and whether that's good or not, I just think I think it's just I I think it's something that the users of the internet are more sophisticated today. So I think they kind of know what they want, what they don't want, and I think choice is important. So I do think there's gonna be some more fragmentation and more specialization in different platforms as opposed to the behemoth platforms that we've seen in the past. But I don't think they're going to go away either. I mean, YouTube. I don't think a Web3 platform is going to get rid of YouTube anytime soon. I mean, I go to YouTube because it serves a great purpose. It's centralized, but I don't care. It's fine with me. I get the videos I like to see. So, but something like a LinkedIn could be different. You know, do I want to go to a LinkedIn? Maybe I want to go to a different one. You know, is LinkedIn really, it's owned by Microsoft, and is that the place I want to go? I think that's where some of the opportunities are.
You mentioned that at least there are people or entrepreneurs asking these brave questions and pointing
Hmm.
out the wrongs of the earlier system. And you said there's more participation, which is true, because earlier I think the participation was largely the Western countries,
True.
and
Yeah.
everybody was missed out. But I guess because of internet, I think it's been the teacher of the world. Anybody who's got the desire and intent can get onto the internet and can learn, because it's the largest
Right.
teacher in the world. It gives you all the
Yeah.
information. The only thing that's stopping you is your desire and internet. I mean, intent,
That's true.
desire and intent. So there's some cool things happening, and I see that there's a lot of people participating, and there's a lot of people sitting in obscure locations, but because of the knowledge, are wanting to change the wrongs of the Web 2 industry. Because I'm not pointing out and saying that Facebook or Google or Microsoft is wrong. I'm saying that they are great platform. They have
Hmm.
changed us. They've changed society and the world on how we live, work, and play. But over time, due to a capitalistic structure of the businesses, we have given too much power onto these big tech companies, because these are alternate countries of sorts. Because
Hmm.
1.5 billion, the largest populated country in the world, China, But look at Facebook. I mean, Facebook's got
Yeah,
2 billion plus,
exactly.
I mean, users, and then you've got TikTok, and you've got so there are
Hmm.
these alternate digital worlds which are brewing, and in those
Hmm.
alternate digital worlds which are brewing, they have created businesses unknowingly by extracting maximum value out of the of the users, consumers.
Hmm. Hmm.
And now I think what I see is that these consumers are waking up and saying, my data is my data, and
Hmm.
you
Hmm.
cannot hoard it, manipulate it, or manipulate a country's election process, or and
Right,
nudge
right.
us to buy. So people are getting more aware. So that's fantastic, and that's the reason I do this podcast. The intent with this podcast is to nudge those curious lot into asking deeper questions, because I guess once we ask deeper questions,
Hmm.
we chances are, I don't know whether it's centralization, decentralization, or re-centralization, but at least maybe we will take one step forward into
Hmm.
creating a world which is a little bit better. So
Hmm.
that's my process, and that's the reason I do this. Now you
Hmm.
are also an investor and a strategic
Hmm.
advisor to startups.
Hmm.
If
Hmm.
you had to put together a metaverse or a Web3 startup, what's the low hanging fruit that you would go for? And what would
Yeah.
you advise a metaverse or Web3 startup to do to be
Hmm.
investor ready?
That's a really good question. Um, just like I still think we're in the infrastructure phase of Web3. Now, the deep infrastructure I think has been pretty well invested in, but there are other layers of infrastructure that need to be developed out. One are the DAOs, so decentralized autonomous organizations, DAOs. They are a way to manage a Web3 platform. Um, the thing is that it's so early. Is this like a corporation, or so there's all kinds of legal issues, management issues, and things like that. I think there's opportunity to develop, like SaaS platforms around things like that. These SaaS tools that get, Zoho, for example, it's big in India, big here in the United States too. Something like that. Those kinds of tools, you know, there'll probably be need for like a ERP or accounting system to deal with all the blockchain stuff, which is not easy to manage, especially on a global basis. So it's not something like you use a regular QuickBooks for. I don't even know how you use QuickBooks, running a Web3 company. So I think there's actually a variety of different interesting applications that can be developed to help these Web3 companies, manage their own systems, their own operations, things like that. And I do interview a couple of these companies in the book, but I just think it's still early days for that, and I think we're going to see more and more of those types of tools and systems come onto the market. Yeah, when I talked about the metaverse and time, the timing and all that kind of stuff, I think enterprise applications will be the last part of the um, evolution of Web3. I think it's going to start with, I think the applications will start more on the consumer side, which they already have, and then move to enterprise, maybe in the next 3 or 4 years, then more to enterprise. So if you're thinking about enterprise, software, selling to big enterprises, you may want to wait a little bit on that one. Yeah, I think that might take some time. Now, maybe you start thinking about it, and going through some of the concepts, but I think that'll take some time. And also, you mentioned, this decentralized, centralized concept. When it comes to enterprise, you just can't decentralize everything, because there's a lot of things that are proprietary to your business. You have customers, you just can't, open everything up about your customers or your vendors. Um, if I'm a bank, and I want to go on the blockchain. And I know there are banks that do that. It's not the open blockchain that they're on. It's a private blockchain, you know. So they understand the benefits of blockchain, but they're not going to go have it so anyone can do whatever they want on the blockchain. That'd be a disaster. And also the regulators would not allow it. So there's healthcare companies, there's utilities, some of the biggest enterprise customers in the world that you would sell to. And if you show them this uh, open public platform based on the blockchain, no one's going to buy it because security and privacy are, so important to them. And they, even if they wanted to do it, they couldn't because they would violate regulations. And so, yeah, I think on the consumer, gaming has been probably the first mover. But I think we'll probably see other or consumerish applications. We're starting to see a little bit like social networks, maybe music sites or, maybe where you create your own music and you can sell it and sell it using some tokens. And I think that, the LinkedIn idea, I think, in fact, I talked to someone the other day, a few weeks ago. He's got, I don't know the name of the company, I forgot the name of the company, but he's trying to create a LinkedIn based on Web3 and for kind of like a Gen Z generation type demographic, because they look at LinkedIn, they go, that's not what I would use. So so I do think the Web3 on the consumer side or the hybrid consumer side, where a lot of the opportunity is, or some of these SaaS applications to help Web3 companies in their evolution.
Tom, my last question to you, because you
Mhm.
mentioned that in this digital world, the possibly the low hanging fruit is and could be the gamings and the live music
Mhm.
entertainment, possibly tokenizing thing, possibly for NFTs for artists and stuff like that.
Mhm.
Could you kind of like maybe like give a few examples around there, and if you had to paint a picture of what the world would look like in a 10-year span, what would you have to say?
A 10-year span. Well, on the Web3 front, um, yeah, the other thing I forgot to mention, security is another uh, huge growth industry for Web3. So, in fact, probably the biggest risk factor. Well, there's a couple of risk factors for Web3. One is it's a little complicated, people to figure out. I mean, some of these structures just are just not, and sometimes the onboarding is kind of confusing. I think that's another opportunity for Web3, by the way, or systems to help with onboarding. But we've seen a whole rash of breaches, the hundreds of millions of dollars in breaches. Um, and so if and some of these people, you know, who are the users of these systems, it could be their livelihood. I mean, some people actually make their living on Web3 platforms, um, and they'll create these environments and they'll sell the things. And um, oh, Roblox is kind of a example of that as well, where people kind of make livings off of these virtual worlds. So the thing is that there's a huge hack, and then people lose their hard-earned money and they can't live anymore. Um, there's a reputation risk. So when these hacks occur, you'll see that these investors will come in and try to fill the hole. But the best way to deal with that is to not have that happen in the first place. There's a variety of different early stage security companies that are focused on Web3, that I think are very interesting right now. So I think security will be a top of mind area, just like it is for any company or should be for any company. But especially with Web3, because your users, are entrusting you with these valuable digital assets. And if you violate that, they're not going to be happy and they probably won't come back. So in terms of like the next decade, so 2032, I guess would be. Um, where would we be? Well, I really don't know, but I know that things will be a lot faster, a lot quicker. I think a lot more immersive. So I think that's ineffable with the metaverse, because the compute power will be there to create these really immersive experiences. So I do think that's clear. Um, I would be just really interesting to see where Meta is at that point. Um, you know, because by then Meta will have been around probably close to 30 years. Because they were founded in 2004. So for a consumer digital company to be around for 30 years is pretty remarkable. So I would even I would question as to would Meta even be, you know would it be I wouldn't be surprised if it'd be a struggling company at that point.
Uh,
You know,
uh, Yeah,
yeah.
that's a profound note to end on, and I mean, I would like no, because I would like to do like possibly an episode maybe 10 years from now with you, and kind of check on
Well,
that.
it'll be in the metaverse. Yeah,
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 because
yeah.
I think Facebook single-handedly has been that company which has driven the conversation for virtual reality, and possibly creating that global conversation of Meta when they rebranded from Facebook to Meta. And yes, that they, I think their business model is revolutionary, because they were the first companies which came and said, okay, let's make things free, because that itself is so revolutionary, and they made everybody a neighbor, everybody a friend, I mean, the world, so closer, it's because of Facebook. I think, we've got an opportunity, you could be sitting anywhere, but you could have a conversation, and you need to give, kudos to, Mark Zuckerberg for doing that, because I think
Yeah,
after that,
true.
I think that
Totally agree.
others have kind of like spawned up, and like you said, now we are questioning, can we create a Web3 for LinkedIn, can we create a
Yeah.
Web3 for, and possibly maybe it's possible. And you also mentioned, there are so many wrongs with the cryptocurrencies today. I think we've got around 6,000 plus tokens and NFTs, and we have these NFTs which are like just scribble NFTs, and people are buying it and they are questioning, why did they spend so much money. Yeah, but possibly maybe in the near future, maybe because see, this is just new. It's the language that we are understanding
Yeah.
of the World Wide Web, or the world next iteration of a computer. Possibly, if we take a collaborative approach, where taking everybody in, maybe the next Web3 that we are talking about could be something actually beneficial for consumers as well as enterprise. And I
Right.
hope that we head towards that. Wish you the very best for your book, How to Create a
Thank
Web3
you.
Startup. If it's there, we'll put the link onto it. Really appreciate, Tom, you taking time and being part of the podcast. To my listeners, if you like what you see and hear, then please press the subscribe button. Until next time, see you guys. Bye-bye. Thank you, Tom. Appreciate this.
Thank you. Yeah.
Super.
Great. It's been great.